if you pop the screens behind you, it's going to get really funny. Because the frequencies of LED versus natural light are a little discordant.
They don't like each other.
Wow, it's just...
Good evening. Welcome to the study session of the Albion City Council, Monday, April 9th, 2018. I call this meeting to order, and we'll begin with a roll call. Clerk Domingo.
Councilmember Barnes. Reed.
Yes, here.
Brown. Lawler.
Here.
Spicer. French.
Here.
And Mayor Brown.
Here. Is there any public comment this evening on the agenda? Okay. Seeing none, I just want to acknowledge that I did receive communication from several council members regarding their absence this evening.
I would say just do 9 to 8, 7 days a week would be my recommendation. I think once you start, and the reason I say that is, you know, if we look at other businesses in town, like for example, that sell alcohol, we allow them to operate on Sundays, and I think if you put an outright ban on this on Sundays, you're going to run into some challenges. So I think you're totally fine regulating the times, but I think if you choose to exclude it on a certain day, I think you're going to run into the challenge, a legal challenge. So my advice would be, as far as the hours of operation, to say it can only operate 9 a.m. 8 p.m.
Councilmember Lawler.
Thank you, Mayor. So there is a clause in there saying that we cannot regulate, because I look at the medical, not, to me, it was like a medical issue versus a recreational issue. So if we're going to do this medical marijuana thing, what kind of roads will we run into if we regulate it on a Sunday like we do the regular pharmacy? Because I look at this as a pharmacy.
Well, we don't regulate the pharmacies. The pharmacies just set their hours. We don't tell the pharmacies that they can't operate on Sundays, or that they can only operate on Sundays during such a period of time. I think the way that we're able to regulate the businesses at all is because the city has a strong interest in public safety for the types of businesses that these are in the AM hours. So we don't impose those regulations on pharmacies. They just happen to only have certain hours on Sundays.
I think I don't think it hurts to be explicit regarding the Sunday thing, right?
I'm sorry?
The Sunday thing. I think the concern with the Sunday thing would be, you know, for example, if we, you know, in this country, Sunday is usually considered a religious day for some groups, right? And so then the concern would be if that was the motivating.
Yeah. So
thing.
The question is going to be, if we came into a legal challenge, how is our regulation rationally related to some city interest? And,
yeah.
And if our only tie-in is going to be a religious issue, we're going to have a problem.
We're going to lose.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not. I'm sorry.
Councilmember French.
Yeah, I agree with you, Colin. This idea that we're not telling them when they have to be open. We're just giving them a window when they could be open, correct?
Yes.
So they could set it like pharmacies do, with limited hours on Sunday because they don't do enough business on Sunday perhaps to warrant them being open 11 hours in a day. So I guess we can let capitalism decide what the hours will be. We just limit. I like the idea of 8, because it gets people first shift, second shift, third shift. They can still, if they need to have access to it, they can get to it.
So the one question I just have, just to ask, and I've heard your recommendation too, but even if we wanted to change for weekend hours, again, we'd probably have to have a compelling reason to do it. Okay.
Yeah, what would our reason be on the weekend? We'd have to have some kind of, significant interest in why we're regulating this particular business differently on the weekend as opposed to during the day.
Okay.
Or excuse me, during the week.
Okay. So the question that I had, I guess I have no problem with keeping it consistent for all 7 days, but I know there was, and this might be your next thing, is the time, right? So I think we, at the last meeting in which we discussed this, we had said, or there was a recommendation, from, was it 8 to 7, or did you take note of that?
What I have in my notes was 9 to 7. The reason that I'm suggesting 9 to 8 is that could potentially cause a problem with our public safety.
Yeah. Okay. Was there any comment from council on that?
I agree with Colin.
Councilmember Reed. Did you, Councilmember Reed?
Your mic was up so we didn't hear what you said.
Yeah.
Oh, how nice. I said I agree with Colin.
Okay. Councilmember French.
I was just going to say, if you chop it to say 6, then you really potentially do difficulty with people who work in a regular 9 to 5 work schedule. So, so I would also agree with Colin.
So I have what? So is 8? So 8 is not too late. Okay. Okay. So 9 to 8. Okay.
And what I can offer you is a lot of municipalities actually do late.
Okay.
So I think we're on the conservative end as far as times. From what I've seen, from looking at other municipalities that have authorized dispensaries, they have been going to 9, 10, sometimes some 11. So I think you're fine going to 8 p.m. and you're on the conservative side doing that.
Okay. Okay. Well, I don't see any major objection.
Okay, so I'll add that. I've got everyone. I know everyone was in agreement with the zone locations for M1P, M2, M2P, and E3. I think everyone was in agreement with the 500, 250.
Go ahead.
With the distances from schools, parks, churches, and then residential areas. The one thing that we may have to address in this regard is for the other facilities, we mandated that if they couldn't be within 250 feet, and if they were within 500 feet of those things, they had to have a fence. Now, a dispensary might be a little bit of a different animal because if they're going to go into a commercial area, the fence thing might not be feasible. So, I guess my suggestion would be maybe we put in some sort of language that, with council approval, the fence requirement can be waived as long as other satisfactory security measures or some kind of language like that is in place to ensure the security of the business and the safety of the public.
Councilmember French.
I was trying to think of a similar sort of idea where you could say if the business is part of a larger shopping area and not a standalone, then the fence requirement can be waived if deemed impractical. I can imagine if they were gonna go in, say, on Drive next to Tire City, putting a fence at 250 feet around the whole thing, just,
Well, because, oh, okay, because my question is going to be, I know that sometimes when you have those kind of strip malls, there's like a rear loading area, right? So would that need to be fenced in?
Well, and here's what I'm suggesting, if they have a rear loading area, I mean, if we're in a commercial area like that, and it's not feasible, maybe we say it can be waived as long as there's other security measures in place that guarantee the safety of the business and the public.
Okay.
I mean, we can tinker with the language, but, you know, I kind of was thinking about that scenario in my head of if they go into a shopping mall, it's not, I mean, I guess hypothetically, you could put a fence, but it would look terrible, and then we have an aesthetics issue, but, yeah, really, they've got to do like bars on the window or whatever, I mean, it might not be the most appealing thing, but rather than a fence.
Okay.
But I guess, what I'm suggesting is maybe for these facilities, we put in a clause that allows the fence requirement to be waived as long as the business can demonstrate to the city that they've taken other measures to guarantee that the business is gonna be protected and the public's gonna be protected, so.
yeah, I like that.
Okay. So one question I do have, and this kind of just popped in my head. So I know every municipality is different geographically, and so the layout's different, and then there are also different schemes for zoning. But in other communities, do they zone? To the best of your knowledge, have they zoned in industrial spaces like that, or is it in commercial? Because I know, like, sometimes we have mixed commercial and residential areas, but do you have any knowledge of that?
Where are they putting them?
Yeah, because I mean, like, obviously, like a city like Lansing is much larger than Albion, so.
In Lansing, I mean, when they were, before they chopped it down to a 25 facility cap, when they were operating at 74, 75, and they were everywhere. They were in commercial areas, they were in residential areas, they were in industrial areas, they were everywhere. I think they've pared that down. I think they're trying to keep them in industrial, commercial. I think they want them anywhere near the residential areas.
Okay. But we've only approved.
The industrial area and the B3 district.
Okay. Okay. So, okay. Okay.
Well, I'm gonna get to that next.
Okay, that was my question.
All right, so then, so I'll work on that portion of it. The other thing that we had talked about was, and I just kind of touched on it, Lansing had an issue where at one point, I mean, granted, they're about 10 times the size of Albion. They had 75 facilities operating. They've since passed an ordinance that has reduced that to 25. Given Albion's size, you're at about 8,000-ish, right? 8,000 people, yeah. 8,000 people. I would say my recommendation would be initially authorize no more than 2 facilities. I would keep the total facility licenses at 20 and have those 2 be part of that 20. If we get to a point later in time where the council feels that the city can accommodate more overall licenses and more dispensaries, we can certainly up that, but my recommendation would be to do 2 to start.
Councilmember French.
Didn't we agree to that last meeting?
I think there was some back and forth, and so I just wanted to make sure that we had clarity on it.
So I guess my question too is, does that need to actually be written down if we're assuming that we're going to have to enforce it within the 20?
So
you see what I'm saying?
Well, the way that I'll word it is that the city will not issue more than 20 total licenses, and as it relates to dispensary, no more of those 20 licenses, no more than 2 can be for dispensary.
Okay.
Is how I'll set it up.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
Okay. Another thing that came up as I was looking at some other cities' ordinances that I thought would be good to address. One of the big problems that some of the larger cities have had, this was a particular problem in Lansing, so I wanted to make sure we could nip it in the bud, is, and I can't remember if it was Lansing or Battle Creek that put this in their ordinance, but they have a provision that the provisioning centers, the dispensaries, are not permitted to have, I don't know what you want to call it, a staff member or a doctor that issues prescriptions on site. Because what was happening is they were basically hiring somebody to come in, oh yeah, you want a medical marijuana thing? Oh, here's your thing, and it's not, the idea is, this is supposed to be medical, you're supposed to have a genuine medical need for this and get an actual evaluation from your doctor, not just, oh, you know, turn your head and cough, oh, okay, here's your medical marijuana card. So, I think they put that in to curtail that issue. I think that's an excellent idea. I would recommend that to council, because I think it's gonna keep this focused on the medical use as opposed to the potential it has for abuse.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, is that, well, obviously you're recommending it's we have the power to do it, but is that part of the rules from the state, or is that just something we can just generally do?
That's something we can just generally do. I think we have a genuine interest in making sure that the people that are using this type of facility are using it legitimately and that it's not being abused. So I think it's certainly within our power.
Okay. So we're basically we're saying they can't be in the same facility, or they can't have actual ties.
We're not saying that they can't have ties, but you can't have somebody on site, like they go in, they have like, you know, Joe Smith, Dr. Joe Smith, oh, yep, I'm not a patient, but can I get my, you know, prescription from you, and then I'll go over to this counter over here and get my marijuana. Because it's trying to get around, I think, the intent of the state statute.
Okay. Are there any concerns with that?
And I think that's all that I have for you for now. I think what I'd like to do is bring it to you as a draft. I don't know if you want to have further discussion on it at the next meeting before you vote on it, or if you want to do a discussion first reading. It's going to change because we're adding provisioning centers. It's going to change about six or seven sections of the ordinance we previously passed. So, and I know that you're missing 3 council documents, so I don't know if you want to discuss it any further before you vote on it.
So you might as well just wait.
Yeah, I think, but we can't vote tonight at all. But.
No, I mean, I'm talking about the meeting on the 16th.
I won't be there, so that'll make it easier for you.
Yeah, I mean, can you have it?
I think I've got it. I'm working on it. I think with these changes, I should be able to have it for you for the 16th meeting.
Okay.
If there's an issue, I'll notify you that we might have to. If for some reason we have to bump it to the 7th, but I think we can have it for the 16th.
Okay. Is there any further questions or concerns or comments about medical marijuana dispensaries? Item A. Okay. We're going to move on to item B, which is goal setting session. You know, there are 3 council members who are not here this evening, but I think we can kind of begin. What we did when we did this at the beginning of last year, towards the beginning of last year, went through a lengthy process to kind of select areas or categories that were important, and you know, some of those have been completed. Some of them that were more long-term. They're supposed to be worked on this year, obviously with the change in administration. I think it's important to review. I did receive some comment from Councilmember Brown, and Councilmember Spicer said she would email me her comments, but I haven't received those yet. But just wanted to touch basis on and see if, if we want to reprioritize and what are some of the things that, if we do that, what we want. So I'm going to kick off, and as a kind of high-level suggestion, when I went through what we approved at the beginning of last year, one of the kind of repeat categories was the neighborhood stabilization. And a lot of that was kind of fell into two categories, right? Basically research and then planning for opportunities and sources of funding, and then also on some projects to actually go about the work of addressing them. So, for example, the council authorized the, I guess, request for quote and for the analysis of the environmental condition of the property on Austin, for example. So that's going forward. But then in terms of some long-range planning, we'll have to do that. So I think neighborhood stabilization really needs to be a core focus, right? Where people are living and the condition of the neighborhoods. I think infrastructure is a big issue. I know the assessment for the sidewalks expired, and I know there's still need and concerns about that, so we'd have to look and see how we want to address something like that. And obviously dealing with the streets, and again, those might be issues where we have to come up with a plan, not necessarily fix all the streets, because that's very expensive. And then looking at kind of economic development, especially dealing with, employment, and unemployment, underemployment. So I think that's something where the city obviously was going to have to partner with the EDC in that, but those are kind of the major, some of the major things that I'd like to kind of prioritize is in that order, neighborhood stabilization, infrastructure, and employment, underemployment issues for residents. So are there any other, like I said, this is very general because our colleagues are not here, but any comments from council? Councilmember French.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess the question I have, or something we could think about, is what is the role that you see, that we should see as a city council in addressing the issues of employment or unemployment? What does that actually mean in terms of boots on the ground? We say that we want to help our citizens find jobs, be trained, but what are the action steps that you have in mind when you think about that? Is that just applying pressure to the Economic Development Corporation to focus their efforts in a certain direction? And is that appropriate given that they are governed by a board rather than us governing them? And two, if we want to talk about neighborhood stabilization, again, what does that look like in terms of, when you mentioned getting grant money or finding funding for environmental assessment and analysis of blighted properties, that's sort of handled, I think, nowadays by the land bank. But are there other sorts of strategies? Do we want to involve the neighborhood planning councils in that? And so maybe a 6-month goal would be to launch those neighborhood planning councils as they can form organically, when Mr. Texel is in the audience, if we wanted to talk to him about what that would entail. But I would say that if we want to talk about infrastructure and streets and roads, I mean, that's a normal operational thing. And I would agree with you wholeheartedly, it needs to be as high a priority as we can afford. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't disagree with any of them. What I'm looking for is what are the action steps and these sort of generalized issues that you wish to address? What do they look like? And can we do the same, are you interested in doing the same kind of prioritization, 1, 2, and 3 that we did last year? You know, what's the low-hanging fruit, 3 to 6 months? What's the 1 year? What's the 2 to 3 years? And I agree that finding resources for sidewalks and streets is gonna be vitally important. And so if we wanna think about, do we wanna think about another millage of some kind that we bring to our voters to address the road concern? And if so, we better get going, because that deadline's in July. And so we have to sort of get that thing going. If we're gonna do a campaign to support such a millage, do the appropriate research and all that.
So, I guess in response, I guess addressing that. So, one of the, well, for example, this is not something that we have to do, but it's something that, again, it kind of falls in the purview and power of the city. So I know there are some communities that have instituted, let's say, community benefit ordinances, which is to say if the city, lends its support for development projects, whether it takes the form of tax incentives or being the fiduciary agent on grant requests to the state, that the city then is able to make certain demands in terms of, local, hiring local talent, in terms of promoting, diverse hiring practices and those kinds of things, recruitment. So I think that there are ways in which economic development is a concern of the council proper. And I think that even in terms of some of the planning for the neighborhood stabilization and the blight issues, that's not to say that the city would single-handedly always address these issues. I think that there's going to have to be, which is what we've seen in the past couple of years, there's going to have to be some partnerships with the land bank and EDC and basically county-level entities and state entities, and even with the Project Rising Tide, it's going to be important because I know that's on the agenda for the 16th. We're going to have to identify 3 main, areas of concern. So I think this is kind of, if not directly, at least indirectly tied to that. So I think the council can speak to that. And in terms of infrastructure, yeah, I think that's something we're going to have to decide on, is if we're going to put that on the ballot for people to decide, is it worth having a millage for sidewalks? Because I receive, even this past week, I've received some communication about that. Someone has a home business, and there's kind of a danger right there with one of the sidewalks turned up. So, Councilmember French. Oh, I thought you had something to say. Oh.
No.
Okay, I thought you.
I just want to make sure I'm not supposed to speak unless others have a chance. I agree with everything you just said, Mayor. I would argue that it's not just a sidewalk millage we have to think about. I think we have to talk about a road millage. My guess is the sidewalks are in better shape than the roads. And so I would argue that that's something we need to research on to think about what that would look like. And maybe it just becomes 2 separate things. Are you going to do a 1 mil, 2 mil addition for sidewalks and another 3 to 5 mils for roads? And I think that $375,000, I think, is all we get for roads, local streets, in terms of the millage that we, with the property tax assessment that we have now. And so that, we have 52 minus 14 major streets, 52 total miles, so 38 miles of streets. That's $1 million a mile. Roads last 10 years. It's not a sustainable picture in our current funding model. So
Councilmember Reed.
I would say too, that when it comes to streets and sidewalks, I think streets are really beginning to need here because people are messing up their their rods and things with their car, and there are streets that have deep holes in them that really need to be taken care of, because when you're driving, you're looking straight ahead, you're not really looking down at the road to see what hole you're fixing to run in. At least when you're walking, you're looking down at the sidewalk, so you know when you're going to come to a sidewalk that's uneven. And I really think we need to invest in some street work.
And I think, Councilmember French.
Sorry, I was going to change the subject, so go ahead.
No, I think that's something that we need to have, and even if it's, like I was saying earlier, even if it's to do the research and get back with us with a plan, because I think we're obviously not going to have the money to fix every street, and I know that we have made the investment in the past to decide, kind of do some triage to see which streets are worse than the others. But that's been a number of years since we've done even that. But I think if we have a plan to say, okay, with this amount of funding, if we increase it, or if the voters decide to increase it, this is how we're going to do the streets. So people at least have an expectation of something being done instead of just, every year we sit here and just kind of do a round robin and pick a street. So if there's like a plan, even if it's going to take a while, I think people will appreciate that. So I think that one goal, even, in terms of infrastructure, just, a funding plan for fixing the streets. I mean, that could be because that's a straightforward goal. So I think that should be a priority. But Councilman French?
I just wanted to throw this idea out there. There's been an awful lot of conversation with an awful lot of people in Albion about finding alternative senior housing across the income spectrum. We've had a number of businesses, organizations come to look at Albion to provide senior housing for all income levels, and it's sort of kind of stalled. And I don't know whether it's our role other than to endorse or encourage, and I don't know how that works. I don't know enough about how that all goes, but if I think about the priorities that we have in our community, good quality one-story housing for seniors, I think, is something we are in short supply. And I'm not necessarily talking about nursing care, but maybe some independent living, or maybe some sort of progressive kinds of care, as well as, I'd love to have a nursing home again in Albion, or an elder care facility, or a PACE center, or any of these sorts of things. So,
okay. So what I would suggest, based on that, is just to have a category, just in terms of housing, because I think that would, that could be one of the major three things that we do with rising tide. So, right. It could be, that's a major one. And plus, it's a part of the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan. So, I think just quality, affordable housing. And I'm forgetting the word that the governor. There was another A word that he used, and I can't remember, but I will find it out. So I think housing infrastructure are major. Are there any? Councilmember Lawler.
Thank you, Mayor. I think that neighborhood stabilization is really important. I know we can't do it by ourselves, but I know we could possibly go out and find potential people to come to the table with the land bank and other entities to try to get our neighborhoods together, because that is for me, for fourth precinct, is a major issue.
Because one of the things I think about is I think it's been something we really appreciate is the land-based support in helping to demolish some of these, houses that have sat there for years. But then it's also, we want to make sure that there's some kind of, we're planning, that there's a plan so that we don't have, empty spaces, because if you go down, I don't know, I'll call it Jefferson, right? There's like maybe 3 or 4 houses, and the rest is just, land. And so we want to make sure that there's a rhyme and reason to what we're doing. Okay. Are there other? So right now I have neighborhood stabilization. I have infrastructure, primarily streets. Street funding plan.
Do we want to?
Senior housing as part of a housing category. Councilmember French.
Last year we had governance on there. I know we still have some things left to do with respect to that. Is it sufficiently important that we add it?
I think we could just add it, but I think it should be understood that, obviously we have the council goals thing, we're gonna have Attorney Smith, and then we still need to do a board and commission, I guess just a general training, but I think that should be just understood. So I'll put it down. Councilman French.
Thank you, Mayor. I would put it there, and we can make it, if we're gonna again use the 1, 2, 3 priorities that we did last year, it's something we can sort of get done in 3 to 6 months. But I definitely put it on there with a 1. It's a low-hanging fruit. We're sort of in this transition period. It'd be nice if we could get all that stuff done before the next meeting on boards. We can be, the boards can be appropriately trained.
Okay.
And knowledgeable. So
one of the, and I don't know if this rises to the level of, it probably can, but well, in light of what you were saying, one of the things that I've always thought about in terms of how the council operates and just how the city operates is, I'd be interested in kind of implementing like a master calendar in terms of like a cycle of things, because I know a lot of times, obviously we know budget happens in a certain part of the year. We know there are certain things that happen in certain parts of the calendar year, but it'd be helpful if we actually set a like a master calendar, so that at the beginning of every year we know, okay, goal setting session happens this period of time, budget happens this time, so like we're all on the same page from council to the administration. It's almost like if you look in the I don't know if it's a course calendar or whatever you call it, but for example, the college has commencements falling on this Saturday. This is happening, so I think it kind of relieves some of the pressure from us and the administration. Councilmember French.
yeah, that's a great idea, Mayor, and it would also then allow us to master calendarize the quarterly reporting of the EDC, the quarterly reporting of Jim Leonard's shop, John Tracy's shop.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great idea.
So I think that would be very helpful.
I have a question first.
Councilmember French.
Scott, do you know if our website has a calendar function on it?
It does.
The website does, yes. I don't know if it'll function that way, and there might be a better option for that.
So.
Because that would be great, because again, if the public has months in advance to know when they're coming, they can plan and their attendance will be improved, and so, no, I think it's a great idea.
Are there other thoughts, other kind of general, because one of the things I was looking back at the goals that we did in, I want to say 2016, and I think there were only like 7 broad categories, and I thought that was very helpful. This is what we did last year was helpful. I thought that was very helpful, because a number of those pretty much we were able to accomplish, right? I know there was Dalrymple was on there, and that was partnering with. Yeah, so I think it might be helpful just to, as they say, kiss the KISS philosophy, to keep it simple. So So right now, I have neighborhood stabilization, and the infrastructure, primarily streets, senior and just general housing, kind of master count or governance, kind of ongoing trainings for that, master calendar, and you know, jumping back to kind of the economic development thing. So well, actually, not jumping back to that. I'll say it this way. So in our last set of goals, there was a category for vision, and we never, I don't think we were ever able to get around to having those sessions on discussions about that. And I think that might be another good use of this interim period to have those discussions, because I think vision and what if Albion's going to be B, but then our planning and resources are targeted towards A, it's not going to be successful. So I think that we need to have the discussion about what type of community we're planning for, so that we can maximize resources to achieve that. And that's something I think we really haven't had that in-depth time to hash that through. So I think that might be, and I know the vision thing was kind of city motto. I think there was a thing in here for, wasn't there a mission statement part to it? Councilmember French.
Wasn't that part of the thing that Daniel Wilson worked on the very last?
Oh.
What was it? The redevelopment ready certification, wasn't that part of that strategic visioning of what the community was to be? We had to do that first before we could actually.
Well, I know there was the charrette thing, but I don't know if we've ever had the discussion about, as a council, what
Right.
what are we planning for? Because I think it's one of the things that, if you don't have a vision or a goal, then it's hard to,
Right.
shoot for that. If we say, hey, we want to have, kind of like what's happening, like, for example, we take the Big Albion plan, the project, they're saying, okay, we want to have upper story apartments. So basically, they're using resources and time to achieve that, because there's like a goal for, we want this many X, Y, and Z's. So I think if we want to say, is a question, if the council has to ask itself, do we envision the community growing? And that's a basic question, but we need to answer that question, right? Is the goal to grow? Is it to maintain? Is it to manage, an inevitable decline, which we don't want, right? But how do we plan for what we would like to see in the community? So I think we need to have that session, so that it's helpful when we go into have other discussions with other partners. It's clear what the city wants to do. So I think I would just say kind of just, what would you say? Councilmember French, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I keep interrupting you, I apologize.
No.
Again, that sounds like a wonderful thing that can start from the grassroots at the neighborhood planning council level, and then they can then help inform the council.
Okay.
So I think it's a good idea. I'd like to be able to think that our vision would be open and a big enough tent that all the current visions that we have, whether it be the development of downtown, or the development of the college, whether it's Eaton Street or Austin Avenue, or any of the projects that we've been working on for all these years, that no one would be left out, but that it's a kind of unified vision that addresses all of those things. I think that's going to be better than if we say we're going to go here and not there.
Oh, no,
So that's all I'm saying. I think it's a marvelous exercise, and having worked in organizations where the visioning happens from the top down, it's tough to get buy buy-in. But if you let community voices originate that conversation and inform the higher up organization, then it's much easier to get buy-in, much easier to get people to come alongside and engage and try to help make that vision happen, so.
Okay. So neighborhood stabilization, infrastructure, housing, governance, kind of a master calendar, and even, I guess even just a subset of the master calendar thing. I know in the past, even with goal setting sessions, that happened like right before the budget. So eventually we might want to get back to that, because then it enables us to basically match how we budget with the goals that we're setting. So this is just kind of touching base because of the transition, but so then we have this kind of vision planning, but with the understanding that that's working with the planning councils, neighborhood councils. Are there other things that come to mind that we should address? Councilmember Lawler.
Thank you, Mayor. So you're saying with the vision and the mission, that council and our different neighborhoods should have some input on that, because a lot of times, I hear about, what's, like they may say, just hypothetically speaking, they may ask one of us, what is our vision for Albion? The community wants to know. And so that is a question that I'm pretty sure that flies amongst all of us on council. So
that's a good point.
We do have to let the community know what our vision is for Albion, so that they will know, and I think it's important.
So one question, since you're here. Okay, Andrew. Oh, Andrew, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So the council approved the neighborhood councils. Do you have a sense of? And I may have asked this at the last meeting, but the time frame.
Yeah, that was, I said probably later in the spring, like May.
Okay.
I think you asked that at last week's meeting as well. So
okay.
It was at the very end.
Councilmember French.
I'm just planning on I got a list of about 25 people in my precinct.
Okay.
I'm just gonna schedule a meeting, hopefully for the end of April, first part of May, and
okay.
Hopefully the week of the 23rd, actually, to just meet at the library and just introduce, get the bylaws tweaked, get the leadership of that group established, and then and give them the charge.
Okay.
And I think if we, as a council, can decide pretty quickly which goals, what are the things that we want input from the NPCs from, that would help.
Okay. What? Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. We want to be doing budgeting in August and September as much as we can. If we're going to have something on the ballot, then how we go will depend on the vote. So that will obviously may require some last-minute tweaking depending on how things go. But it would be lovely if we could do a lot of this in advance of August and September. Get that input over the summer and the spring, so that we have all this data that we can then use to help us move forward. And if we can make a decision sometime in the middle of the summer about what our vision is, because my guess is that there's going to be some things like the MEDC grant for the Big Albion plan is going to be coming down the pipe sometime soon. I don't want that to be one of those last-minute things, so that we know that it's coming, so that we know what we're looking for, so it's not delayed or. And likewise, if we're going to try to help ADC sort of strategize where we want them to go, it'd be nice if they got some advance notice of that too. So.
Okay. Thank you.
There you go.
Are there any other kind of initial ideas. Oh, yep.
One thing I think we should address as well on infrastructure is the water and sewer pipes. They tend to get forgotten, and I believe we were discussing water and sewer rates at some point, from what I remember hearing. And there's a lot of the infrastructure that, while we don't see it, needs to be taken care of just as much as the streets do. So.
And the water towers.
Yep.
And a new water tower.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
So I think we gotta make sure we keep that with the infrastructure as well.
Right.
Okay. Are there any additional? Are there any additional goals or ideas? Okay, so what I'm going to do is, I've made a list here. I'm going to send that to the interim manager here, and then so we'll have that written down. And then, like I said, I'm going to go back. I'm going to find. I have it. I just don't have it printed out here. But from 2016, which was like the briefer version of how this can be formatted, and I think that'd be helpful to do it that way. And so then we probably could have that by our next meeting on the 16th. And I just put that again as a discussion item on the 16th. So.
Is that what you're putting on there?
Yeah, I would just put, yeah. Are there any other comments, council? Okay. Public comments. Persons addressing the city council shall limit their comments to no more than 3 minutes. Proper decorum is required. Are there any public comments this evening? Okay. Seeing none, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Support.
Moved and supported. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Those opposed? Okay, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.